Okay. This is the third and the last of this semester's CSSR seminars. We'll have a set of more than 3 in the spring, and those of you who have signed up by email will be automatically notified, and those of you who haven't, please leave some form of contact information so we can find you. The CSSR is very happy with this series. We put up we put up video versions of each talk on the web. They are actually accessed, and I have a sense that we're doing a good thing. Now, tonight's speaker is not an academic. Andy Kimbrell is profoundly not an academic. What he is, by his own admission, a visionary. And I will tell you something about him, and then I will tell you something about the obligations of a visionary in my own mind. Andy Kimbrell became executive director of an organization called ICTA, the International Center for Technology Assessment, in 1994. In 1997, he founded the Center for Food Safety. He's one of the country's leading environmental attorneys, and one of the country's leading authors on environment and technology issues. He has a graduate degree in psychology and is the author of, by my count, 6 books. I may be off by 1 plus or minus. The most recent of them, Fatal Harvest, The Tragedy of Industrial Agriculture, and Your Right to Know, Genetic Engineering and the Changes in Your Food. His articles on law, technology, and psychology issues have appeared in many journals of technology law and many popular magazines as well. Prior to his becoming director at ICTA and CFS, Mr. Kimbrell, his website says, Andy was senior attorney and policy director of the Greenhouse Crisis Foundation, where he organized the first global summit on global warming in 1989, and the initial International Local Leaders Summit on Global Environmental Issues in 1990. He filed the first litigation requiring government agencies to prepare environmental impact statements on how their agencies' actions affected the ozone layer's depletion and affected global warming. He also initiated the litigation recently that resulted in last spring's Supreme Court decision finding that the Bush administration's Environmental Protection Agency had acted illegally in not regulating global warming gases. So Andy is a visionary and a sentimental one. A person driven, I would say, by a sense of obligation to do the right thing. And as we are a university and a teaching institution, I want to close my introduction with a quote from C.S. Lewis that applies to the distinction between understanding a subject and having a reason to understand the subject. Lewis speaks of certain people in an academic context. He says they, those people, conclude that the best thing they can do is fortify the minds of young people against emotion. My own experience as a teacher tells an opposite tale, he says. For every one pupil who needs to be guarded from a weak excess of sensibility, there are 3 who need to be awakened from the slumber of cold vulgarity. The task of the modern educator is not to cut down jungles, but to irrigate deserts. The right defense against false sentiments is to inculcate just sentiments. And I think that's what Andy Kimbrell does better than most people I know. Here's Andy.
Thank you very much. Can people hear me can you hear me just with this mic?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much, Robert. It is true that in 1994 I was named as a leading visionary by the Utne Reader, and they then asked some of us visionaries to give about 10 minutes of visionary talk at Town Hall, downtown, and a number of us did so, and I was about the 5th visionary to speak. And the prior visionaries all had very thick glasses, as do I. And it occurred to me that one of the real requirements of being a visionary is that you really can't see at all. So that should be a caveat on today's talk. Additionally, Robert is correct. I am not an academic. As a matter of fact, I'm a lawyer. And worse than that, I'm a Washington, D.C. lawyer. I'm occasionally called a bioethicist, and I don't quite know what that means. But I was asked a bioethical question, very troubling one, by a taxi driver a couple of weeks ago, and he asked me, what was the difference between a lawyer and a sperm? And despite being a supposed bioethicist, I had no answer to that. He said, well, the difference is, you see, a sperm has at least a 1 in 1 million shot of becoming a human being. That also works, 1 in 1 million shot of actually working. So you can write those. I often find that at the end of my talk, people actually have only remembered the jokes. So the next time I see them, like 2 months later, all the important things I think, I love that lawyer joke. That was really good. You know? Thank you for being here today, particularly when the topic is one of evil. So thank you for being here and taking this trip with me on the shadow side of science and technology. And I think we hear so much of the utopian side that I'm going to try and explore today some of the, I think, profound issues on the shadow side of much of the technological, economic, and social structure that we're in. I know many of you worked on that. And in doing so, I really, these reflections come not out of though I will talk about many of the thinkers that have helped me with this, these reflections really come out of my working on global warming, working on genetic engineering, currently on nanotechnology, and actually confronting the corporations in litigation, actually being there sort of in the trenches, if you will. So perhaps for those of you who've studied a long time, maybe I can add a slightly different perspective because of some of my experience. And so bear with me on my musings on this, and I think you'll see as we go, it'll be somewhat relevant to a lot of the issues that we're dealing with right away. But I wanted to start in a rather unusual way. I was telling people, by the way, one of the things I'm doing right now is I'm doing a documentary on the century of the gene. The gene was named exactly 100 years ago, and really its shape was first discovered in 1953 by James Watson. And one of our big interviews for that documentary is Robert. That is how we got to know each other and talk. But the problem is that now that I'm editing it, I see Robert about 5 or 10 times a day. I probably see him more than his wife does. But he's still always welcome. And his contribution was spectacular. So thank you, Robert, for that, as well as the invitation to be here. I almost never use PowerPoints, never use images, including the one behind me. But for some reason, I was driven to do that for tonight's thing. And we're actually going to start with one of my very, very favorite films. Actually, it would be very useful even if I just played the entire film. But I will not do that. But this is one of my very favorite films in the world, which is one of the best introductions I know to today's subject, which is the subject of the enigma of modern evil, of why so many terrible, terrible things happen around us, why 800 million children are starving right now, why we're seeing the biochemistry of the planet changed in ways we are, why we see corporations really causing incredible devastation throughout the third world elsewhere. Why are we doing it? And yet we know so few evil people. Kind of an enigma. I mean, we have a shortage of Mephistophelian human beings walking around. I mean, there's Dick Cheney, okay. But I mean, there always are exceptions. But most of the people I know, that Monsanto, some of them are much better people than I am. I've sued people in the Department of Defense on biological warfare, and they're good people. How could we have all this tremendous evil that's threatening the very survival of the planet, and everyone seems like a pretty good person? How's that possible? So I call it the enigma of modern evil. And there's a number of films and books that are either about this consciously or explicitly or implicitly. One, by the way, is The Heart of Darkness of Joseph Conrad. One of my favorite. You want to take a look at that. It's actually about the distinction between the cold evil of the colonialists versus the hot evil of Kurtz. If you read that book again, I think you'll see which one he ends up thinking is more dangerous. But this is a film. The film is called The Third Man. And it was written by Graham Greene, one of my favorite authors, and directed by Sir Carol Reed. 2 years ago, it was named as the best British film of the 20th century. If you haven't seen it, I hope this little introduction to it will get you immediately to see it. It is a spectacular piece of work. Also has the best musical score of any movie ever. And, but it's directly related to this enigma of modern evil. The scene I'm going to show you, well, I'll let it speak for itself, so let me set it up for you. The movie involves a con artist named Harry Lime. Note the lime is a shade of green, and Graham Greene wrote it, so Greene's at work already. Harry Lime, he's a con artist, and he's in post-war Vienna. This was filmed in 1948 in Vienna. You can see Vienna now divided between the British, the American, the Russians, right, and the French. The city is divided. It's devastated by the bombings. And this is the city that they have it. And what Harry is doing, he has a con going where he is taking antibiotics coming into the city, diluting them so he can create a lot more of them, and selling them. But of course, these diluted antibiotics don't work. So a lot of children are dying. But Holly Martins, who is a grade B writer of Westerns, is called over by Harry to take part in his scheme. And he comes over. But meanwhile, Harry, to escape the police, has faked his own death and his own funeral so he can continue his scam that's killing all these children. But Holly sees him, Holly Martins, played by Joseph Cotton, and he says, I want to talk to you about what's really going on, talk to you about what you're doing, talk to you about what's really happening. So they finally do meet. Harry comes out of the darkness, as you'll see, and this incredible scene, they meet, and Orson Welles, the inimitable Orson Welles, explains to Harry what the, I have to turn this thing on here, explain to him sort of what he's doing. Asian, can you help me with this thing? This is why I don't use technology during my time. But fortunately, there's a person with a much fresher synapses than mine that can make this work.
Or just slightly more lucky fingers, maybe.
Oh, there you go. It's the thumb that does it. Yeah, so here we are. This is Joseph Cotton playing Holly Martins, the Western author, finally meeting his old pal and con artist, Harry Lime. That is a zither. This is the great Prodder. This is Harry Lime.
Quite some busy time.
Listen,
yes?
I want to talk to you.
Talk to me. Of course. Come on.
Kids used to ride this thing a lot in the old days, but they haven't the money now for a devil.
Frühstück?
Geht in order.
Oh, vielen Dank.
Listen, Harry, I didn't believe it.
It's good to see you, Holly.
Was that your funeral?
It was pretty smart, wasn't it?
Oh, the same old indigestion, Holly.
These are the only things that help, these tablets. These are the last. Can't get them anywhere in Europe anymore.
You know what's happened to your girl?
Hmm?
She's been arrested.
Tough, very tough, but don't worry, old man. They won't hurt her.
You're handing her over to the Russians.
What can I do, old man? I'm dead, aren't I?
You can help somehow.
Holly. Exactly who did you tell about me?
I told the police.
Unwise, Holly.
And Anna?
Unwise. Did the police believe you?
You don't care anything at all about Anna, do you?
I've got quite a lot on my mind.
You wouldn't do anything.
What do you want me to do? Be
get
reasonable.
somebody else.
You expect me to give myself up?
Why not?
It's a far, far better thing than I do with the old limelight, the fall of the curtain. Oh, Holly, you and I aren't heroes. The world doesn't make any heroes.
You've got plenty of
outside
contacts.
of your stories. I've got to be so careful. I'm only safe in the Russian zone. I'm only safe here as long as they can use me.
As long as they can use you.
I wish I could get rid of this thing.
So that's how they found out about Anna. You told them, didn't you?
Don't try to be a policeman, old man.
What do you expect me to be, part of your...
You can have any part you want as long as you don't interfere. I've never cut you out of anything.
I remember when they raided the gambling joint, you knew a safe way out.
Sure.
Yeah, safe for you, not safe for me.
Old man, you never should have gone to the police, you know. You ought to leave this thing alone.
Have you ever seen any of your victims?
You know, I never feel comfortable on these sort of things. Victims? Don't be melodramatic. Look down there. Would you really feel any pity if one of those dots stopped moving forever? If I offered you 20,000 pounds for every dot that stopped, would you really, old man, tell me to keep my money? Or would you calculate how many dots you could afford to spend? Free of income tax, old man. Free of income tax. The only way you can save money nowadays.
A lot of good your money will do you in jail.
That jail's in another zone. There's no proof against Besides you. It should be pretty easy to get rid of. Pretty easy. Wouldn't be too sure. I carry a gun. Don't think they'd look for a bullet wound after you hit that ground. Dug up your coffin. And found Harbor? It ain't.
Holly, what fools we are, not talking to each other this way, as though I'd do anything to you, or you to me. You're just a little mixed up about things in general. Nobody thinks in terms of human beings. Governments don't. Why should we? They talk about the people and the proletariat. I talk about the suckers and the mugs. It's the same thing. They have their 5-year plans. So have I. Used to believe in God. Well, I still do believe in God, only. I believe in God and mercy and all that, but the dead are happier dead. They don't miss much here, poor devils. What do you believe in? Oh, if you ever get Anna out of this mess, be kind to her. You'll find she's worth it. I wish I'd asked you to bring me some of these tablets from home. Holly, I'd like to cut you in, old man. There's nobody left in Vienna I can really trust, and we've always done everything together. When you make up your mind, send me a message. I'll meet you any place, any time, and when we do meet, old man, it's you I want to see. Not the police. Remember that, won't you? Don't be so gloomy. After all, it's not that awful. Well, what the fella said. In Italy, for 30 years under the Borgias, they had warfare, terror, murder, and bloodshed, but they produced Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, and the Renaissance. In Switzerland, they had brotherly love. They had 500 years of democracy and peace, and what did that produce? The cuckoo clock. So long, Holly.
Tempting to keep watching that. So Harry Lime. Lime shade of green. In this movie, there is a female who is actress named Alida Valli, who plays Graham Greene's lover, Anna. She's a Sudetendeutsch, which is a Czech German, and what happens here is that he refuses to turn on his friend Holly until, and I would show it to you, but I can just tell it to you because it's hard to work with that. He takes him to the hospital so he can actually see the children. And finally, when he actually sees the children, he says, I'll help you catch him. And then I won't ruin the rest of the movie for those of you who haven't seen it. It's one of the most famous endings of any film in 20th century film. But Anna does not view either Harry as much of a villain, or, much to his distress, because Holly Martin's now, played by Joseph Cotton there, has fallen in love with her, she doesn't see him as much of a hero no matter what he does. And I see this as a real important Greenian moment, because even though Harry Lime is diluting that antibiotics and killing those children, she's been through the war. And she knows that the English don't have a leg to stand on as far as those little dots. When they bombed Dresden, firebombed Dresden, when they firebombed Hamburg, when Winston Churchill and Bomber Harris decided to do that, those were mostly women and children who died. And the Americans? Well, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, when this film was made, was only 3 years before. I think all those little dots. By those standards, Harry Lime isn't much of a criminal, is he? So I think Anna, oddly enough, when you see the movie, in the very end of the movie, I think you understand her better when you put it in that context. And this reminds me of another story which I'm going to amplify and then get into sort of the meat of the discussion, which hopefully we can continue in a dialogue later. And this had to do when I was living here in New York City. I lived here for 22 years, and as a young man in high school during the Vietnam War, I was taken to a play, an off-Broadway play, and it was called The Rescue. And the reason that you see the bomber here is that's how the play starts. It's an American bomber bombing over North Vietnam. And he's on his 3rd or 4th bombing mission, all those coordinates, 20,000 feet below, except he gets shot down. And the play begins, he's limping. This is, this is one of those early 1970s plays where everyone was extremely serious. And so it was a little hard to take in the beginning. Laurence Olivier said, I don't mind a good actor, I don't mind a bad actor, but God save me from an earnest actor, which I feel about activists, by the way. But I slowly got involved with the play, no matter how earnest these actors were and how kind of tawdry it seemed. Because it started with him limping across the stage with his broken leg, and he's taken in by a kindly North Vietnamese farmer. And North Vietnamese army comes in and says, did you see the pilot? We saw him parachute down. He says, I haven't seen him. Angry neighbors whose farms have been bombed, who've even lost relatives, say, did you see this bomber? We just want to get a hold of him. The old farmer says, no, I haven't seen him. And in this isolated plot of land, slowly, the pilot begins to recover both his health and also psychologically. And he begins to fall in love with the rhythm of the land. And fortunately, the farmer has a beautiful daughter. And so he falls in love with the daughter. And many months pass, and he's gotten used to this new rhythm of life. He's in love, and he's really beginning to understand a lot more about himself and what was happening when a Green Beret band comes into North Vietnam to rescue him. That's why the play was called The Rescue. And they come in, and he's torn. He hugs his former comrades. He said, this is really great to see you. But he's also torn about leaving where he's at. And then the head of the Green Berets says, the problem is we broke international law to get here. And the only two people that know that are these two people, and they have to be killed, the farmer and his daughter. And he pleads, he says, they defended me. They defended me against North Vietnamese. They defended me against people who wanted to kill me. These are my friends. You can't have this. But his pleas over and over again are rejected by the lieutenant who says, these are my orders, end of story. So finally, when he realizes there's no hope, he says, at least let me kill them myself. So he takes him in a room and he takes out his gun, and after a few minutes, he shoots himself. And after this play was over, it was right over the bombing of Cambodia had just taken place, and everyone was talking at the coffee house later about it, and I was just so disturbed by this play. And I said, what in the world, why is this play so compelling? And after a while, it's very similar to what we saw in The Third Man. I realized what the real theme of this was, and it's the theme of my talk tonight, which was that what he could do at 20,000 feet, even be called a hero for what he was doing at 20,000 feet, he couldn't do face to face. At 20,000 feet, just like Harry Lime, they're just dots or less. They're just coordinates, abstract coordinates that you hit, shock and awe and all that kind of thing. But face to face, he'd rather kill himself than kill those two people who he'd come to love. And that's when it occurred to me that one of the great themes, moral themes of our time is actually the theme of distance. And that's the theme that Graham Greene brilliantly portrays in the Prater wheel in Vienna in 1948. They're way up on that wheel. And that wheel represents the wheel of modernity, that wheel of technology, which creates this amazing distance between our acts and those who are affected by those acts. I call it the pilot's dilemma. And we're all in it. Every one of us is in that pilot's dilemma. We are in it all the time. We may not be aware of it, but we are. We're all taking actions at a tremendous distance. And by the way, this is the shadow side of distance. I don't want to make it sound like all distance is bad. Sometimes it's very good to get distance from a relationship. Sometimes it's very good to see the forest, not just the trees. So there's an advantage to distance. But there's also this tremendous shadow side. There's a synonym for distant. You say, that's a distant person. You also say, that's a cold person. And that's why I call it cold evil. And by evil, I don't mean wrongdoing itself. Most theologians believe that by evil we mean a condition that makes wrongdoing inevitable or almost impossible to resist. It's like a disease. Bronchitis makes coughing almost inevitable. So evil makes wrongdoing, what they used to call sin, inevitable. But how, again, we have this enigma, though, is how is this possible? And here I would recommend to you a wonderful thinker, a guy named Jacques Ellul. Anybody here know Jacques Ellul? Forgotten so soon. Jacques Ellul is a great French sociologist who in translation is so dense that you need a machete to get through the prose. But he has a great thing to say. Jacques Ellul posits this idea. Jacques Ellul says we have lived in three great milieus in the history of the human race. The first was the natural milieu, lasted for thousands and thousands of years, millennia, where we actually, our primary interaction was with nature. And almost all indigenous peoples, some that still do, live in that natural milieu. Then about 10,000 years ago, with agriculture, we went into the social milieu, where our primary interaction was with other human beings. And here we have the whole history of literature, the whole history of art, and of course, primarily agriculture. And what Ellul posits, which we're about 100 years into, 125 years into now, is that we then went into the technological milieu. He thinks this is the unexplored and ethically, morally, legally, politically unexplored transition of our time. That most of our interactions, and certainly in our age right now, most of our children and grandchildren's interaction is with technology. If you add up all the time you spend on television, or they do, television, telephone, computer, inside a car, inside an airplane, inside a technologically controlled environment rather than natural environment, that would, how much time do you think that would be in their lives? Yeah, exactly. And our greatest fears are created by technology, just like in the old days the greatest fears were created by nature, right? Indigenous peoples, the greatest fears of nature, what are our greatest fears? Nuclear destruction, right? I lived through that. Most people here of a certain generation, we live most of our lives in the fear that we are on a computer trip line to Armageddon, to the end of everything. Wow, talk about, that's much more than fear of God for most people. And our greatest hopes are in the technological milieu. Food for everyone, cure all the disease, turn these nasty carbon bodies into silicon immortality, as O.B. Hardison wrote in his book, Through the Skyline. Get rid of this carbon nonsense. For silicon, we can float forever. Immortality is just right there. So our greatest fears, so that's what Ellul means by the technological milieu. And the problem with the technological milieu is that it creates this tremendous distance between actions and their consequences. All right, so here you have corporations, right, who are manufacturing pesticides. But they're long gone. Even in the location in which their factory is, one of those pesticides hit an aquifer, and that aquifer causes leukemia in children. Or when those pesticides are sprayed in a third world country, and their farmers and the children become ill or die because of those pesticides, they're not there. You know, the tire company that is sitting there doing a bottom line thing saying, if we make this improvement in the tire, it will eliminate 0.1% of accidents. That's going to cost us more than the litigation when the tire blows up. But they're not there on the street when somebody's daughter is in that car and the car crashes because of that bottom line. And if you come to Washington and you see the World Trade Organization or the IMF, and they sit there figuring out, calculating structural adjustment programs. Right? They're saying to a country, hey, to pay back your debt, we're going to cut your health services, cut your environmental protection, cut your education services. But they're not there in those countries when they see the illness, when they see the crime and the violence that comes from the unemployment, environmental destruction. They're at a tremendous distance. They're at a tremendous distance to that. There's a great Robert J. Lifton. People know who Robert J. Lifton is? All right, this wonderful guy who's written about numbing from the nuclear age, that we were psychologically numb. He has this great thing about the bombing in Vietnam. He says, he said, these men were, talking about the men who were making decisions in Washington, these men were able to give the counsel they gave because they were operating at an enormous psychological distance from the people who would be maimed and killed by the weapon systems that result from the ideas that they communicated to their sponsors. The lesson, therefore, is that the scientist and technologist must, by acts of will and imagination, actively strive to reduce such psychological distances to counter the forces that tend to remove them from the consequences of their actions. I like that. Acts of will and imagination. Kind of hasn't happened, has it? What about you and me? All right, this is the kind of evil that less than 1% of humanity creates, but 100% are complicit in. You know, when I'm driving, to Maine, the old days I was driving my family up to Maine, I wasn't going, yes, creating global warming. Way to go, Kimbrell. And when I turn on the air conditioning, I didn't say, great, ozone depletion. Way to go, yeah, yes. Right? I was just complicit. And when we eat industrial meat, We're all complicit, aren't we, in the 10 billion animals, the really unspeakable cruelty of the 10 billion animals that are in the factory farm system in those confined animal food operations. We try and hide it. But again, the tremendous distance, that's way out there, Andy. I think it's like in Iowa or somewhere. Who knows? I'm in a really nice restaurant right on the Upper West Side. Don't tell me. Shh, shh, quiet, right? We're all complicit because of the distance. And it isn't just the physical distance, as Robert Lifton says, it's psychological distance. Most of the people that participate in this system get what are called jobs. The original meaning for job was robbery. During the enclosure movement in England, the peasants that were taken off their farms and brought to the cities and forced to work in the factory were jobbed, were robbed of their lives. We still have this meaning in bank job and con job, right? And the word career was about the same time in England, because when they went to London and they saw all these new people with jobs, they looked like they were careering, which is the same word as careening, around London. They say, look, that guy's careering. Oh my God, tell him to stop, you know. One of the factory owners said, getting a peasant behind a machine is like getting a deer behind a plow. And that's why there were all the revolutions and problems. Jobs and careers. That leads to what E.F. Schumacher called the sullen irresponsibility of modern work. The fact that when you are working for that insurance company, for that bank, or that corporation, you know you're doing something irresponsible, but you have psychologically distanced yourself from the actual consequences of what you're doing. And I have too. I used to work for a corporate law firm. Couldn't do it anymore. There is, of course, something called a vocation, a calling, vocatio in Latin, and there's something that's called a profession, where you actually work at something as the profession of your faith, profession of something you're able to do. Maybe that's the sentimental aspect of what I'm talking about, that Robert was talking about. What it seemed to me, instead of these Democratic and Republican candidates saying we need more jobs, what about saying we need people who follow a vocation, and they can do something they can be proud of, be professional of what they do. But there's this tremendous psychological distancing. And one of the things that I'm seeing, and this could be that I'm now one of those generations of people, I used to think that when somebody was my age, they were old. You notice that, how that changes? I used to say, hey, 50, like ancient, 60, forget it. God, when I was, now it's, hey, 50 is really good, you know, 50, 60, I can see that coming around the bend, that's going to be really good. 60 is the new 40, you know. So maybe I've reached that stage. But when I see the level of technological cocooning around, you know, everyone in these things, you know, and then everything, that little, their own TV screen, even an airplane. I mean, when you see the people literally completely enclosed, computer games, children, they become, and this is not meant in any way to be disrespectful as they're actually suffering from this disease, but they become, in a different way, autistic. So they don't hear what's going on, even outside their homes. When I walk up my streets in Virginia, I used to, when I was here, living in Park Slope, and even out in Queens, we used to play in the streets. You know? But then even then, you'd walk by a house and you'd see that one TV light. Try going through a suburb now, you'll see 3 or 4 little blue things. You know, mom's doing her thing, dad's down there watching ESPN, the kids are both on their computers doing their different games. They had like 6 lights in there. No, they're not talking. I call it technological cocooning, and it massively increases this autism. So they're not, much less hearing the suffering of a forest or hearing the suffering of those 10 billion animals, or really paying attention to what's going on around the world. They're actually in this even more cocooned. So that is what we mean by cold evil. And I think it is all of our, you know, I'm a practicing Christian. I've heard hundreds of homilies in my life. I've never heard one about this. Never one. They may mention environmental problems, sure. But what do they talk about is personal evil. And God knows personal evil or sin or wrongdoing exists, domestic violence, rape, crime, 9/11, sure. Those are what I call hot evil. Those are crimes of passion, crimes of lust, crimes of madness, crimes of fanaticism, psychological projection, absolutely, and much suffering is created by them. That still exists. But it is dwarfed. When we're talking about altering the biochemistry of the planet, and again, 800 million kids, you know, when we think of the technified wars of our time, the billions that were killed in the wars of the 20th century, That dwarfs all this individual hot evil, and that's what they're still talking about in the churches. This level of evil, which is really the fundamental problem of our time, completely. I've never heard one homily. I've yet to hear my first homily on this. And it's funny, as I was driving up, I was reading an article in a psychological journal, which is, I think, reading psychological journals, I think, is a psychological disorder in itself, by the way. But that's another lecture. Here's Robert Kennedy. This is what he said the day after Martin Luther King was shot. And by the way, 3 months before he was shot. And he was talking about this hot versus another different kind of problem. He said, "But there is another kind of violence," he writes, "slower, but just as deadly and destructive as the shot of the bomb at night. This is the violence of institutions, indifference, inaction. This is the violence that afflicts the poor, that poisons relationships between men. This is the slow destruction of a child by hunger, and schools without books, and homes without heat in the winter. And this afflicts us all." So Kennedy was sort of getting it. So I was thinking, here, let me run through these things here for a second. Uh-oh. Oh, there we go. We've already covered, this is, again, distance versus this. So here, I was thinking to myself, what in the world is behind all this? How is this related to my work? What's going on? I mean, how is this? There must be something that is leading us into this cold, evil state, that is allowing us not to see it. Something hidden. I love detective novels, so maybe I'm always looking for something hidden. And on April 1990, I had a litigation. Of course, when you do your biography, you always mention the litigations you've won. I've lost a lot of cases. And this is one I lost. I was down in Florida for one of the shuttle launches, except this shuttle, which had about, God, I remember the payload was like 2 million pounds, but I was concerned with about 22 pounds on that payload, it was nuclear powered. It was the first shuttle to go up with a nuclear power pack. And I was concerned that if we had a Challenger-like disaster, the nuclear material would be showered over the entire state of Florida. And they had no protection for that. They just said, oh, the odds are so small. So I argued it the night before the launch. I argued it down in federal court, Florida. And Judge Charles Pratt was there. And I went on, I said, you really have to at least put this off until we figured out what the real danger is. And he said, son, I was young enough then he could call me son. He said, son, it's Monday Night Football, and this is over, and you lose. True story. So I was in my own moral dilemma. Do I leave the state just in case it does blow up so I'm not one of those who's poisoned, or do I stay and watch the darn thing? So I decided I bore some responsibility for losing this case, and so I'd go down with the ship. And so I don't know, have anybody here ever seen a shuttle disaster? Not on TV you have, but you've seen a shuttle liftoff? It's quite amazing. I was there. This was, I think it was still called Cape Canaveral then. And you're pushed a certain distance away, and I looked, and I was looking at the faces around me, and it was awe. They were like in awe. They were like, and people were crying, and they were holding their babies up. I've seen this before. I have seen these exact expressions before, and I've seen them a lot. What was I thinking? Let's see. I have this in my front foyer. This is The Ascension by Albrecht Dürer, his etching of the Ascension. And the looks on their faces, since it's in my foyer, I see all the time, was exactly the looks of the faces of the people that are watching the shuttle go up. Same look, same awe. Something's up. Another ascension. Something's going on. That's when I begin to think, and by the way, when I would see the fanaticism of the opposition, when I would try and stop a shuttle or stop a GMO experiment, I mean, the fanaticism was just amazing. And I said, you know what? I think there's a religious function at work here. I think there's something religious about this new technological milieu that Ulul's talking about. I don't think it's just capitalism. I don't think it's just greed. I don't think it's just institutional inaction. I think there's a religious zeal behind this somewhere. Somewhere. So old C.G. Jung, people don't talk about Jung much anymore. Here's what Jung has to say after studying the myths of pretty much every society on earth at that time. Religion is a neutral function which has existed from the beginning and cannot be disposed of with rationalistic and so-called Enlightenment criticism. Even as the modern age subjects these religions and creeds to ridicule, they reappear unconsciously in secular society. And that's misspelled, sorry. Naturam expellis furca tamen isque recurrit. That means what you try and expel with a pitchfork will still come back and bite you. Whereas the missionaries were conscious of serving a new God by combating the old ones, modern iconoclasts are unconscious of the ones in whose name they are destroying the old values. So I said, if that's true, if there is some kind of weird secular religion, if this whole technological milieu and this cold evil is a function of a kind of an unconscious secular religion, what could it possibly be? Then I decided it probably had something to do with the idea of progress. Something having to do with making what Eric Voegelin calls the immanentization of the eschaton, of saying a heaven on earth. It's somehow taking the Christian eschatology that there's a heaven, saying, okay, we're not going to reach it out there, but we're going to reach it here. And that is possible. And not only is it possible, since the Enlightenment is actually our duty to do that. Right? I have often, when I'm opposed genetic engineering and nanotechnology, I've had a number of people who said to me, you are against progress. I know your type. You would have been against the combustion engine when it was first invented. A guy said that to me at the Bureau of National Affairs. And I said, of course, I've been on the Long Island Expressway at 5 o'clock. Anybody's been there, of course they're against the combustion engine. Here's Richard Weaver, one of my favorite writers. By a transposition of terms, progress becomes the salvation man is placed on earth to work out. And just as there can be no achievement more important than salvation, so there can be no activity more justified in enlisting our sympathy and support than progress. Now here's a key point. By the way, a real simple thing when somebody says you're against progress, you know, I love the fact you guys love nature. I'm sure the poor, but progress. Say that's an incomplete sentence. Progress towards what? See, that's the game they played with progress. Then they go, ooh, I don't know, like saving lives or just getting more food or something, you know, I don't know. You never say, what would you imagine a city should look like? What do you imagine our agriculture should look like? How should we produce our energy? Until you've answered those questions, you really don't know what progress is, do you? You don't know whether bovine growth hormone being injected into our cows or patenting plants is progress, do you? You don't know if nanotechnology or nuclear power are progress, do you? Because you don't have any idea of what you mean by progress. You're just using the word, and this was the fantastic little transposition they made. Progress equals technology, no matter what the results of that technology are. So they said, I'm sorry, Andy, but you can't get in the way of can't stop progress, man. It's out of Pandora's box. So progress, instead of being pilgrim's progress, instead of being progress towards an ideal, may be a justice, or be in harmony with nature, or be with any real principle that we would have as a true principle of progress, has become identified completely with the technological milieu. As it grows, supposedly progress grows with it. Again, a trick to get people to admit that is I always say, progress, really, progress towards what? But if we have the religion of progress, if progress really has become the new religion, where you're a heretic if you're against this secular idea of secular heaven here on earth, this utopia, then how does it achieve this? And I originally did this tongue-in-cheek. I'm not sure it's tongue-in-cheek anymore. See what you think. I think what they did unconsciously is recreate the Christian Trinity. And here it is in a 7-second soundbite. Science will let us know everything. Technology will let us do everything. And the market will let us buy everything. Okay, that's the short version. It's probably better than the long version I'm about to go into. But so if they really did recreate the Christian Trinity, if we have an unconscious secular religion, which has all the valence and zealotry of a religion, but hiding under a secular philosophy, what is that Trinity? Who's playing which role? My view is that science, with a capital S now, Remember, as I go through these, by the way, I am talking about an inflationary view of each of these. I'm not against science. I'm not against technology. I'm not even completely against the market, though that's, of the three, that's the one I'm closest to be an absolutist against. Each are very important. I'm talking about the way they have been treated within this new religion, massively inflating them to places where they never should have gone, and many people don't want them to go. So please, it's like distance isn't always cold. Distance is necessary. This is, please balance this as I speak. Don't think I'm speaking in absolutes. Certainly not. But nevertheless, I think this is what I'm saying is absolutely correct. And one of the, about this inflationary thing, and one of the sure ways you know it is because science has been hypostased. It's capital S science. Science tells us that your emotions are controlled by your genes. Science tells us that the world began with a Big Bang. Of course, now they say it's a bunch of little bangs, which I like better. I'm for localism. Science has become hypostased as omniscient. Right? How did it do that? How did science do that? How did science become omniscient? Well, science became omniscient because it created a new genesis, essentially. Here's a very controversial quote by Lewis Mumford. I'm happy most people don't read Lewis Mumford, because if they did, they know that I've never come up with anything original in my life. You know, he's a genius who's forgotten, so you can steal his stuff almost endlessly and no one knows it. It's plagiarism all the time. He says, he has a little section in one of his books, The Pentagon of Power, called Galileo's Real Crime. He said, I think Galileo he definitely was innocent of what he was charged, but he should have been charged for a different crime. And the crime that Lewis Mumford wants to charge Galileo with is, Scott Buchanan called it being a world splitter. Before Galileo, there was no difference between the quality of an object and the quantity of an object. Right? Gravity, for example, was simply seen as a larger part of the quality of attraction. Attraction between people, right? Magnetic attraction. They said, oh, gravity is just simply that part of attraction that attracts things to the Earth. So the quality of attraction was given to gravity. What the Enlightenment thinkers did is they split them. They were world splitters. They split them open. So, for example, Galileo wrote that he even thought of taste was opinion. He said all that we can know is quantity and the void. And he even said atoms and the void are the truth. That's a direct quote. So what Mumford said is Galileo committed a crime far graver than any of the dignitaries of the church accused him of. For the real crime was that of trading the totality of human experience, not merely the accumulated dogmas and doctrines of the church, for the minute portion which can be observed and interpreted in terms of mass and emotion. So, what if you ask me, okay, Kimbrell, tell me about your daughter? And I'll say, well, my daughter, let's see, her bone mass is 5.9%, she has some potassium, 98% water. I say, Kimbrell, that's not your daughter. Sure it is, and it is. Or I can even say she's 5'6", 125 pounds. How about your daughter? Right? I often think of, to make this world splitting even more direct, think of the first E-flat chord of Beethoven's Eroica Symphony. All right? Berlin Philharmonic is coming, or Simon Rattle's conducting, boom, boom, first big E-flat chord. Now what if you scientifically were to find out all of what's going on with every one of the musicians, muscles, all the various vibrations and all the tones, all the aural nerves going on in the entire audience, all the muscles in the conductor? That would take you years and years and years, millions of dollars. And what would you know about Beethoven's Eroica Symphony? It's all true. Not wrong. You'd know nothing about Beethoven's Eroica Symphony. That wouldn't tell you anything about the meaning. It's a fundamental confusion between cause and meaning. And by denying the quality of things, and by reducing everything to quantity, science could become omniscient. Because through the scientific method and through quantification, they could say that is the only thing that's truth. Everything else is subjective, or even more dramatically, according to Galileo, the void. So here we have the omniscient God the Father, science, capital S science, when it assumes this role. And does it have a dogma? Is there one way? Is there like Christ, I am the way? What is the way of science? Well, the scientific method, of course. That's the only way to find the truth. Anything else is subjective, emotional, your problem. I mean, that's why psychotherapy, for example, one of the things I've studied, is pretty much gone now from any school, because where's the empirical evidence? How can you prove it through the scientific method anyone has helped? I mean, I can say I've been helped, you can say you've been helped, but... So, and by the way, a lot of this is even done in Latin, and we even have our white-haired Yahwehs. We even have the white-haired gods. I was going to throw Freud up there too, but I like Freud. I like Einstein too. But this is how this is not so much Einstein, who actually was very humble, and even Freud, who was very humble, but this is rather the popular, this is trickle-down science as omniscient. Science will let us know everything. It is God the Father. But just like the Old Testament God, it is fairly distant. I mean, everyone's in their white coats speaking a language no one understands. It has to come to the people. So we go from the Old Testament to the New Testament. This is a quote by Philip Broad, Undersecretary of Commerce. We're doing some work on trying to regulate nanotechnology in September 2003. And I wrote it down, but I checked it. This is accurate, I promise you. He said, on a human level, nanotechnology's potential rises to near biblical proportions. It is not inconceivable that these technologies could achieve the truly miraculous, enabling the blind to see, the lame to walk, and the deaf to hear, curing AIDS, cancer, diabetes, and other afflictions, ending hunger, and even supplementing the power of our minds, enabling us to think great thoughts, create new knowledge, and gain new insights. That's nanotechnology. Sounds kind of salvific to me. Sounds like the miracle worker to me. Science incarnates through technology. Technology is the sun that will save us. How are you going to become immortal? Not through Christ anymore. Maybe through nanotechnology or genetic engineering. It is how we experience science the Father every day, through our televisions, through the miracle of flight, through the miracle of antibiotics. And technology has created enough miracles for people to buy in. And what is the aim? How many people here are of the Christian faith? If you don't have to raise your hand if you don't want to. What is the aim of Christ? Why did Christ come? To save us, right? And we will all then become what? We will become the corporate body of Christ, right? Well, I just told you, through the technological milieu, we become the corporate body of technology. Technology basically is kind of the milieu that we all live in. Our greatest fears and our greatest hopes are in this technology. And yeah, Christ could walk on water, but, whoops, that's another thing. Let me go one more. We have jet skis. Pretty impressive. What is the doctrine that's behind technology? What is its dogma? It's the dogma of the machine. What makes a perfect machine? Efficiency, right? Efficiency, maximum output, minimum input, minimum time. Let's go back to my kids. All right? What if I told you that I'm a son and my daughter, and I treat them very efficiently? Minimum input of love and money, but maximum output of good grades and promises not to misbehave. Good dad? What if I told you I treat my friends very efficiently? I get a call at 2 in the morning. Andy, Bob's left me again. Sorry, Jane. Inefficient conversation. Got to give a talk tomorrow. And by the way, inefficient friend. I have an English setter, Virginia, who does no work at all. She's a beautiful dog, but she does no work. And I lavish affection, food. She's the most inefficient thing in the world. She occasionally pees on the rug and eats my baseball gloves. You know. Efficiency is how all these things work. But is it how we work? You see, just like science, by taking out the quality, the warm qualities of life and reducing everything to quantification became a basis for cold evil, because all you do is quantify, everything else is unscientific. Just so with technology, if it's not efficient, it's not worth doing. I love organic agriculture, Andy, but it's not as efficient. But we don't treat anything we truly care about on an efficiency basis, do we? Here's an example of that. This is pig number 6707. I took this picture. This picture's from Channel 7. Pig 6707 was injected with, and actually genetically engineered with human growth genes. So it would grow very, very, very big. This came from an earlier experiment where they'd taken human growth genes and genetically engineered mice to create really big mice, and they succeeded. You saw this amazing picture on Science Magazine, which I don't have here, of huge humor mouse and its sibling without the human growth genes in every cell of its body. It took them a little while to say, what can we do with a really huge mouse? I mean, there's, you know, Halloween and stuff like that. And so then USDA, using our taxpayer dollars, said, if we can make a really big mouse, we should be able to make a really big pig. So they tried. And 6707 was one of their marginal successes, except all it did was make his musculature much larger. So he became overwhelmed by his musculature. I could not take a picture of him except up against a wall, and he couldn't walk. He walked on his forelegs. He was cross-eyed, bow-legged, impotent. And I went to the researcher, Dr. Purcell, and I said, this is a tragic comic creation, what's going on here? And he said, hey, Andy, the Wright brothers didn't succeed the first time either. See the confusion between machine and life? They're trying to make a more efficient pig. So we have the omniscient Father. We have the incarnated Son in technology. So what's the Holy Spirit? Our enormously productive economy demands that we make consumption a way of life. We convert the buying and use of goods into rituals that we seek our spiritual satisfaction, our ego satisfaction in consumption. Right? It is my contention that money is the Holy Spirit, the urge to buy. Right? Every day, what brings us to technology, what brings us into this is the market. And money, look at this, the Nordic Stock Exchange, money's become invisible. It's like the Holy Ghost. You can't touch it anymore. It's impersonal. You know, no one says, God, I really love this $10 bill. No, I mean, it's really beautiful, you know. This is really important. I wonder what the symbols mean. No one does that. And we know that it's on a computer thing. I mean, you click one thing and $1 million zillion are taken from Mexico and given to Japan. Entire economies are undercut while this strange, mysterious thing keeps going, right? And these malls, sorry, back, right? These are church-like. I think people are, I mean, I may be wrong, but I think people are far more enthusiastic about the excitement of buying a new car or new clothes than they are about any religious ritual that they're going to. We are bought in by the market. This hope that we can buy everything, this hope that we can own everything, and this invisible, strange, mysterious, wonderful, terrifying, impersonal force based in competition. Money, right? Now, is there a dogma? We knew the dogma of quantification, we have the dogma of efficiency. Is there a dogma here? Do they have a religious dogma too? What is the dogma of the market? Supply and demand, right? That's it. Competition, supply and demand. Competition is incredible, right? Andy, we have to compete with the rest of the world. We can't have all these environmental protections. Competition. Rollo May, one of my favorite psychologists, says competition is always the ethic of elimination. And worse than that, it always encourages that has been eliminated to try again and again and again. It's the ethic, it is the ethic of elimination, not the ethic of relationship. If I were to say, okay, here's my two kids, Kailani, Nicholas, come here. Kailani, Nick got A's last and you got B minuses. You're gone. You are the weakest link. I have to teach you that, right? Competition is the ethic of elimination. But do any of us really treat anything we care about or love on a competition basis? I hope not. But you see how this works. Anytime you will bring a morality or an ethic into this world of progress, science, technology, and the market, they have an answer for you. That's not, science hasn't proven that. Science hasn't proven that dogs have emotions. Science hasn't proven that those pigs are feeling pain. They may just be squealing in that slaughterhouse because it is some neural response. We don't have any empirical evidence of that. Right? And again, if you appeal to almost anything, you say, listen, you can't treat your workers this way. We need to have no, it's not efficient. We have to be efficient. Why do we have to be efficient? Because we need to be able to compete in a new global marketplace. Andy, you're not getting this. And that's what prevents any real relationship from breaking through. And that really is the ideology of cold evil. As long as we allow them and allow the system to be based in this trinity, you are a heretic if you go against any one of these three. Just try it. Try it here at Columbia. Try really being a heretic to any of those three. Efficiency, scientific method, supply and demand. Maybe supply and demand you can get away with in a progressive place. You'll be treated as a heretic. Now Jung has this idea. He says every time there's a trinity, there's a dark fourth. Right? We've got the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit in Christianity. Who's the dark fourth? The devil. Satan. Looking a little like Orson Welles, I think. Is there a dark fourth here? If I'm right in positing this, if we really do have this secular religion, if every time they're arguing for a new genetic engineering experiment or stem cell research or anything else, it has the zealotry. Every time they're saying we need to have the World Trade Organization, we need to have more competitive, open, free markets around the world. If these three things are true, what's the dark fourth? Religion, yeah, religion actually is becoming I have to think about that. I think religion, but the real dark fourth is nature. Because nature imposes limits. And each of these is built with the sole idea that limits are intrinsically evil. That limits technology, capital needs to have no limits. Technology respects no limits. We're trying to mix species with genetic engineering. There's no limits to any of them. Limits reflect a teleology, a view that is just not acceptable under this. And nature becomes the dark force that has to be controlled. You know, I sometimes tell students, do you know that there's nothing that's not the environment? I think students think that these malls are made of stuff that's not on Earth. I really believe that. You know, I really think that I think when people flush the toilet or throw something in the garbage, they think it disappears. I don't think they understand that it's all linked to the Earth. It's all linked to nature. So if I'm right, when we are opposing certain experiments, when we are trying to fight for environmental protection, when we are trying to fight against noise pollution, we're trying to fight any kind of a local factory that's coming in, we're not just fighting against that particular thing, and we're not just fighting against greed. Yes, we are fighting against corporate greed that feeds off the system. Yes, we are fighting against a government that is ensconced in certain kinds of graft and in power play. But I think behind it is the strong valence of this unknown, unconscious secular religion that has really imitated Christianity, but in doing so, it has taken out all the warmth of Christianity, all the based in love, and substituted these dogmas of quantification, efficiency, and competition. So if so, we have kind of, how do we deal with this then? I mean, I'm doing my law, each of you are teaching. How do we deal with this cold evil? That really is changing the biochemistry of the planet. That really seems so intractable, so difficult to deal with. Well, what happened to our pilot? He got shot down, right? The pilot got shot down. And what did that force him into? It forced him into relationship, didn't it? It forced him to actually a relationship. And once he was in relationship, rather than kill, he would kill himself. So I think there's no healing in this without relationship. I want to read you something by one of my very favorite thinkers in the whole world, who addresses this rather directly, I think. This is Rachel Carson. Rachel Carson's 100th anniversary is this year, by the way. Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring, but she wrote a number of beautiful books about the sea. She worked for the government for 17 years. And she wrote Silent Spring about trying to break the distance You see, just like when the pilot was shot down, that distance was broken. People like Rachel Carson said, you cannot spray these poisons and not know how this is affecting you, your children, your community, and the Earth's community. People like Cesar Chavez broke the distance and said, you can no longer buy grapes or anything in your supermarket, saying, who picked these grapes? Do they have education? What is their health like? Breaking the distance, constantly breaking distance. The organic food movement breaks that distance. Natural childbirth movement breaks. Anything, they all break that distance. Say, no, I want to actually, I know there'll be more pain, but I want to experience this. I want to have a quality experience, not just you think it's more efficient that way. But here's what Rachel Carson says. She says, mankind has gone very far into an artificial world of his own creation. He has sought to insulate himself with steel and concrete from the realities of earth and water. Perhaps he's intoxicated with his own power as he goes farther and farther into the experiments for the destruction of himself and his world. For this unhappy trend, there's no single remedy, no panacea, but I believe that the more clearly we can focus our attention on the wonders and realities of the universe about us, the less taste we shall have for its destruction. And that's what she did. And I think one of the things that we can do is, and I'll finish with this, is change some of the language that we use. And one of the things that I do with the Center for Food Safety is change the language of what we call ourselves when we make these decisions in here. Who are all these people? What do we call them? Consumers. Thank you. We call them consumers. Even Ralph Nader, who was one of my teachers, he had the consumer movement, right? But consumer means to consume. Like a fire consumes a building. There was a disease they used to call consumption. You know what that disease was? TB. You know why they call it consumption? Ate away the body. Ate you down to almost nothing. What a weird thing that we should all call ourselves and allow ourselves to be called consumers. We're not consumers, are we? Every decision that you and I make, and I'm not on top of this mountain, believe me. Everything I'm saying today doesn't mean that I've personally dealt with these things or defeated them. I'm just throwing this out as a possible way to help us in all of our work. Every decision I make and that we make in the supermarket, anywhere else, is a creative decision. The food that you buy will create a different future for the animals involved, for the earth, for the soil, for the farmers. We are not consumers. Each of us is a creator. Whether we like it or not, we're creating whether we know it or not. With what we teach, with what we say, how we live, how we handle our family situations, we are creating different futures all the time. By pushing into the passive consumer role, it's one of the great psychological ploys of all time. Instead of saying, no, whether you like it or not, you're creating a different future, everything you do. We are not consumers. We are creators. We're not consumers. We're also citizens. Citizens have the right to say we have sovereignty, not the corporations. We're also saying that we should not have technology control our choices. We should be able to control the technology. Why should technology control our choices? We're humans. We're sovereign citizens. Why shouldn't we control technology? Right? Well, if we were to say, listen, how many people here are for nuclear power? Raise your hand. Mm-hmm. How many people here are against nuclear power? Raise your hands. All right? How many people don't know? All right? If we were to take a vote, there would be a majority against nuclear power of this audience. So let's say we then call the power company. We say, we're going to make sure that none of the light that's in here comes from a nuclear power plant. What would their reaction be? Honey, you can't believe who called me today. These nutty people up at Columbia, they want me to, right? We actually, within that technological milieu, it's a totalitarian milieu. Right? We can't control where the energy comes from. We can't control, most people can't even control the jobs that they have. We can't control where your taxes go, even if a war you do not support. We're creators to the extent that we understand that we can take responsibility for our means of production, and that those means of production can be responsive to our moral values and our beliefs. Then you live in a democracy. And let's just finish with that one more thing. What's required for a nuclear power plant? What do you need? Lots of money. Yeah, capital intensive, most capital intensive system is. What else do you need? Uranium, what else do you need? Lots of water. It's incredibly water intensive. What else do you need? Yes, some place to put the waste. Very good. Barry Commoner said, building a nuclear power plant is like building a house without a bathroom. You're going to argue forever where it's all, whose room it's going to go in. And we're still doing that. Not in Nevada, not in Washington, not my room, not my room. Ugh, you know. What else do you need? I mean, this is a centralized source of energy. You need huge bureaucracy, right? I mean, you can do massive bureaucracy, A, to build it, because it has to be safe. A huge scientific elite, because the most dangerous stuff in the world, and also terrorists could get it. Right? A totally centralized system to be able to get it out to all the states and all the millions of people it's going to go to. And a military elite to make sure it doesn't get out. So what kind of country do you have if that is your means of production, if that's your salvation? You have a military elite, scientific elite, huge bureaucracies, massive capital expenditure, right? Huge losses of water and dangerous uranium and indisposable waste. And I can't take responsibility for what's going to happen with that. You can't, and it can't, as I just said before, can't be responsive to our needs. That is a totalitarian technology. You may want a totalitarian technology, but it is a totalitarian technology. You can't control it, I can't control it. And we can't take responsibility for the 100,000-year half-life of what it's going to do to generations, untold generations further down. And if you build an entire system around totalitarian technologies, I don't think you should dare call yourself a democracy. Now, to contrast that, potentially, it can be used in different ways, but potentially solar energy, right? Does it need a military elite? Necessarily, no. Scientific elite? No. Huge bureaucracies? No. Could you control it as a neighborhood or even a single home? Yes. That is potentially a democratic technology. But we've been so used to the salvific idea of greater and greater technology being our salvation that we've forgotten that we need to control it. We've forgotten that our job as ethical human beings is to say we need to control technology and not have technology determine our choices and, in fact, determine the actual fate of the world itself. So, ultimately, then, to break the ideology of technology, we contrast quantification with a celebration of the diversity and quality within us. We balance efficiency with what? Remember the efficiency? What do we balance it with? Love. It's harder to do, Robert, than we think, right? What if you go to in front of a federal court and I say, Your Honor, you just need to protect this river because we all just love this river. I'm not saying it's going to be valuable to anybody. We're just going to protect it because we love it. And I've never known an environmental attorney, by the way, who got into it because they wanted to see more efficient use of natural resources or human resources, which is under that language that we call ourselves. They do it because they love a mountain, they love a river, they love a certain area. And what do we balance competition with? How do we defeat this? Cooperation, exactly. And if you read anthropologists and you really study nature, contra Darwin, you realize that things don't survive primarily through competition. All societies, if they're going to survive, through cooperation. So if we celebrate our diversity, we have something based in love, and we know that fundamentally our relationship is the only way we can heal through cooperation. What does that resemble? Socialism. For me it does. As a socialist thing, right? It's basically what almost all the great wisdom traditions have been teaching from the beginning. And we need them even more today if we're going to really finally, all of us, not just fight the environmental crisis, not just fight our political crisis, but also each of us, including me, confront the moral crisis that I believe at least Harry Lime was asking Joseph Cotton to look at, and each of us, through all of our decisions, and me through all my decisions, are made to ask it, to do every day, to finally say, no, I've had enough. And I'm going to try, within the context of this, to celebrate those alternatives to the ideology of cold evil in my personal life as well as in my public life. Thank you very much.
Well, if this was a serious attempt to introduce the idea of limits in an otherwise ideologically driven notion of limitlessness, we have an immediate and concrete expression of the notion of limits in the fact that we have to be out of here at 7:30. So we have a limited amount of time for discussion. But I think that Andy does have the capacity to answer some number of questions in that time. And I would begin by asking how you combat what you consider evil while remaining cooperative. Where is the cooperative element of your combat?
Does anybody else have a question? Not just. I think, as I say, welcome to, that you all came out to a discussion of evil is just great, because no one likes to talk about evil. And the real evil that I like to talk about the least is that resides in me. Everything I talked about, do I have the cold quantification in me? Yes. Do I sometimes treat the people who work for me in an efficiency? Yes. Am I competitive? Absolutely. As I get older, do I hate the limitations of nature, looking in the mirror and feeling my joints and chug-a-lugging Advil? You bet. So the first place I look is, in my own shadow, because otherwise, then you just start projecting on everyone else and not realizing it's in yourself. And I think that creates kind of a brotherhood or sisterhood when you do that, of people who we're all in this together. And I think once people are aware of, and we are aware of all of us that are shadows in ourselves, then it's much easier to deal with it out there, because you realize you're not projecting. If you look at what George Bush has projected onto Saddam Hussein, for example, or not just, what about Saddam Hussein, Muammar Gaddafi, Osama bin Laden, Noriega, Khomeini. We've had 30 years of projecting all of the evil we've done in that part of the world on these dark men. Well, if that was somebody who came into your psychotherapy couch, you'd say, we have a problem. You're projecting all of your evil onto other people. And when you do that, you want to eliminate those people, because they become the scapegoat. We didn't overthrow the government of Iran in '53. Oh, we did. We didn't support a war in 1980 that killed 1 million people. No, we did. But we forget that. We're the good guys and they're the bad guys. So the first place where you find cooperation, rather than projection and elimination of scapegoats, is understanding that part of yourself, is realizing that shadow part of yourself. And then that allows you, without doing that, I don't know how you can find cooperation, because you'll be projecting too much. You'll be saying, hey, we're good and they're bad. And then within this system that we're talking about, we're all complicit. I'm complicit. I'm terribly complicit. So we might as well embrace each other and say, at least we're complicit, but we can fight. We can fight resistance in all the various ways we do. We can break that distance. Whether you're a journalist, whether you're making a movie, whether you're a teacher, you can break that distance and shatter those ideologies and at least balance them with the other ideology. Each of us can do that and say, it is about celebrating qualities, and it is about love, and it is about cooperation. I'm writing an article on Darwin right now, on his misunderstanding of cooperation in nature. Each of us can do it in our own ways. Yes?
I have two questions. The first question is about the worship of science and technology is a global phenomenon, but when you look at America, it always puzzles me that how America has a kind of a schizophrenic attitude towards science, because at one side we see this worship of science, the belief that science and technology can fix everything, but on the other hand, you see kind of how few Americans actually believe in evolution, while a huge amount who believe in creation or intelligent design. So can you comment on this, why it's this way? And my second question is, looking at this audience, I found most people are older than me, and I found that's a huge problem. It's like we have all the young kids developing science and technology, probably totalitarian technology as mentioned. So how do we face that challenge? Thank you.
I don't like the questions from this audience. No, those are great questions. They're very nuanced questions. I'll try and answer them quickly. Yeah, we're schizophrenic. But we're schizophrenic in every way, right? Because as I was saying, we have a science based on quantification, but none of us talk about our kids or about nature that way, right? We talk about efficiency, but none of us treat anything we want efficiently, love. And the same with competition. We know we only survive through cooperation, right? So we're schizophrenic. These dogmas which we all worship are not the ones we actually live with, right? And the same with science. I think the problem with science is not science. Scientia is, after all, just knowledge. Right? That's where it comes from, the word scientia, knowledge. It's when science is hypostased. It's when science, nothing wrong with science, it's wrong when science becomes omniscient. When you think the only way to get to truth is the scientific method. When that's a way to get to certain kinds of truth, and very important truths, but not the truth. That's the mistake. But the trickle-down, I call it trickle-down science. See, that's what accounts for this. Trickle-down science through the media. And this is one of the things we were dealing in the film that we talked to Robert about, what people think genes are, because it's very profitable for people to think, and it creates more of this genes are going to save us thing. It's that trickle-down science. You can have people, be on their knees in front of science, but also not know anything about it, but still expect it sooner or later to save their lives. Remember, this is unconscious. I doubt that any of you have ever heard this before. I don't think anybody's probably, I'm not saying this is right, it's one approach, but a lot of this is unconscious, the way we think about science, technology, and the market. Its valence is a religious thing. So we can both admire it and know nothing about it at the same time. It's like people who go to church on Christmas but know nothing about, haven't ever read the New Testament, It's possible. The second part of your question?
It's like, look at this audience.
No, but, oh yeah, young people. Yeah, that's a terrible problem, because I have two children, and I think it is a problem. I don't know how to deal with it. I really don't know how to deal with it. The one thing I would say is the difference between hope and optimism. Right? Optimism is you've made a calculation that things are going to change. You've looked at the empirical data. Hope, which is something that like every New York Mets has, every fan has every year, unlike a Yankees fan, there's no empirical evidence to think that you can actually win. But you hope, every fisherman hope, And I would, every time people ask me about that, I go, well, when Christ's, apostles were in that room, scared, whatless, they never thought that what was going to happen, right? Nelson Mandela in prison didn't say, I'm going to take it, right? I have not known one single political scientist who predicted the fall of the Berlin Wall. Not one. And if you can find one, and I've asked many audiences, no one has ever given me a single site where this is what's going to happen, right? So there is hope, and I intuit that a new thing is coming. So organic food is the fastest growing movement. Vegetarianism on campuses is tremendous to see. I mean, I'm seeing a sensitivity. Environmental concerns are sometimes the number one thing we see with young people today. So while I can't give empirical data, and I think the technological cocooning is fighting against this in a very dramatic battle, like industrial food versus organic food. It's a lot of dramatic battles we're all fighting right now. Nevertheless, I have hope. For some reason, I don't know why, I can't tell you. I have this tremendous hope that a new way is coming, and a new alternatives to the market system will create a natural economy, alternatives to the corporation, which will actually be forms of cooperation and trust. I just have a feeling that these new entities are coming around, and maybe the very force of technology itself forces us to become more human in some ways. So that's as much as I hope is all I can give you, I guess.